Hey, my friends, welcome back for another episode Behind the Walls with your girl, Anna B. Just a little reintroduction. If you're new here to the channel, welcome. Welcome to Behind the Walls with Anna B and friends. We go state by state, diving into the cases that led women behind those prison walls. Per usual, thank you to all my friends that have subscribed to the channel. Those of you who share my videos, like them, and of course, engage in the comment section. I wanted to also send a very super thanks to all of those who have sent me super thanks. Brian, Lily, to you, Little Aussie, Lisa, also known as Motley Mama, Jessica, my sis, Shani Girl. I appreciate the love, y'all. So if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Join me and my friends as we go state by state behind those walls. Shout out to our friends who put a request in for this video. We're behind the walls in Nebraska. Let's get into it. Okay, before we get to the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women, which is in York, let's take a little detour. Well, maybe not a little detour, about 110 miles of a detour to the Omaha Correctional Center in Omaha, Nebraska. An all-male facility which is home to a mix of offenders and offers a variety of rehabilitative programs, both clinical and non-clinical. In some of the non-clinical programs, inmates don't just participate, they actually co-facilitate along staff members. In 2021, Samantha Cedilio became one of those staff members. She began working as a non-clinical program manager at the medium security facility with an office in the library. November that year, prison staff members were advised that Samantha was involved in a relationship with the library clerk. The library clerk was a 47-year-old man who's been incarcerated since his murder conviction in 1997 and is serving a life sentence. Her and the inmate were found alone in the library for nearly an hour. That only resulted in Samantha receiving a warning. Fast forward to January of 2022, the inmate was removed from his position as library clerk. Obviously, they continued to have boundary issues between the two. Samantha at that time received only a write-up for her negative behavior. There were several other alleged incidents reported or observed by the prison staff members from January to March 2022, including an incident in which the inmate and Samantha spent nearly 6 hours together in her office. How the fuck is that possible? The last incident was on March 30th, 2022. Samantha was seen on surveillance taking off her radio belt as she and the inmate moved behind the office door, out of camera's view. She was then seen by another officer hurrying back to her chair with an untucked shirt and messy hair, trying to get it back together. That day, she was asked to provide a report on why the inmate was in her office. She wasn't told that staff had already seen the video of the incident. She allegedly became angry, stating she was tired of explaining why the inmate was in her office, and she decided to quit. She submitted her resignation. July 2022, same year. A cell phone was found in the inmate's cell. Staff members attempted to search it, but he allegedly broke the device. However, the SIM card was salvaged and authorities retrieved messages that allegedly detailed the relationship between he and Samantha. Phone calls, messages, and letters between the inmate and Samantha were reviewed, and authorities allegedly learned she and the inmate's family spent a lot of time visiting one another. So they was in a whole full-blown, she was prison wifey, huh? And the messages told each other how much they loved each other, and they even spoke about her pregnancy and baby shower. They acknowledged their anniversary as November 22nd. And later, detectives discovered a baby registry that Samantha had made with the due date in mid-December, which was 9 months after they were caught back in March. After giving birth to the baby, investigators were granted a search warrant for a DNA test, which did not exclude inmate James Price as the father. An arrest warrant was issued for 31-year-old Samantha in March of 2023, and she was arrested for first-degree sexual assault of an inmate, which is a crime that could have landed her in prison for 20 years. However, she avoided any jail time. She pled no contest to an amended charge of attempt of a Class 2A felony, and she was sentenced to 3 years probation. She's also prohibited from owning or possessing a firearm. She's ordered to maintain employment, stay away from drugs and alcohol, attend a woman's trauma group and a parenting program, and she also must register as a sex offender. If she completes probation successfully, she could be eligible to have her conviction set aside. In the early morning of April 11th, a passerby discovered the nude and beaten body of a woman named Laura LaPointe in a roadside ditch located in a wooded area near Hummel Park in Omaha. Close to her body was an empty brandy bottle and a stick, apparently a tree limb 6 to 7 feet long. It was later determined that Laura had died of injuries caused by multiple blows from a blunt object to her head and many other parts of her body. Laura was an 18-year-old prostitute in the Omaha area. The investigation into her death started with questioning those who were also in the sex trade business. However, all those questioned had denied any knowledge or any involvement in Laura's death. The police had no leads until June 24th. A woman named Jo Helen Robertson was arrested on unrelated warrants when she asked to speak to someone about Laura's death. Not at all a suspect, Jo Helen met with a Douglas County deputy sheriff and gave a tape-recorded interview in which she denied being in the Hummel Park area where Laura was found, but told the deputy that in the late evening of April 10th, she and 3 other prostitutes, were driving in downtown Omaha with 4 pimps. According to Jo Helen, the 4 pimps decided to teach Laura a lesson, but Jo Helen asked to be let out of the car because she didn't want to teach anybody a lesson. The next day, one of the women told her that 2 of the pimps had beaten Laura LaPointe to death with a baseball bat in a park. Throughout her tape-recorded interview, Jo Helen made numerous contradictory statements, according to police, about the occupants of the car and about the identity of the individuals who went to the park where Laura was murdered. After Jo Helen's interview, the investigation now focused on locating a 1977 Ford LTD, the car Jo Helen said she was riding in. The Ford was located at a woman named Geraldine Carr's house. Search warrant in hand, law enforcement officers searched the Ford and found strands of hair, fibers, a gold pendant necklace, and a baseball bat. Officers tried but failed to obtain any readable fingerprints from either inside the Ford or from any of the items that were inside. On June 28th, a woman named Carolyn Joy was in custody at the Douglas County Department of Corrections for a prostitute charge. On that same day, Carolyn was transported to the sheriff's office to obtain a hair sample, undergo a polygraph test, and to continue an interview that actually started back on June 8th. Carolyn told the sheriff deputies that she had spoken with her attorney and that her attorney advised her not to say anything unless she was present. After her hair sample was collected, she was placed in an interrogation room. The sheriffs, on their own initiative, attempted to contact the attorney who Carolyn said was representing her. That attorney told the sheriff she did not represent Carolyn Joy and had no intentions on doing so. Carolyn was confronted with this information by sheriffs, but was not given an opportunity to call the attorney herself or any other attorneys. But she did request that the warden of the Douglas County Correction Center at the time, Charles Terry, come to the sheriff's office, which he did. Warden Terry informed Carolyn that she could trust the sheriffs and that if she knew anything, it would be best for her to cooperate and tell them the truth. Terry went on to explain that no promises could be made. Shortly thereafter, and of course after signing the Miranda Rights Advisory form, Carolyn had made incriminating statements as to how she and 3 other prostitutes had killed 18-year-old Laura LaPointe. Hair samples collected from Joe Helen and Carolyn were analyzed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation at its Washington, D.C. laboratory. Hair embedded in the stick found at the scene of the crime was identified as Laura's. Hair taken from the baseball bat was identified as Carolyn's. No hair sample was identified as belonging to Joe Helen. Carolyn Joy was the first to stand trial in October of 1983. Her 1984 appeal documents do not provide much detail about the specifics of the trial testimony. However, per other resources, Carolyn did admit to taking part in the murder. She said she never meant for anyone to die. Geraldine Carr had testified for the state. On the record, the prosecutor asked the judge to grant Geraldine immunity, which was granted. She testified about the events of that night, which included all the women except the 4th woman, who at the time was being identified as Lori Johns. A lot of testimony, though, surrounded the fact that all women involved, even the victim, were prostitutes. Carolyn was convicted on October 28, 1983, and on November 21st, she was sentenced to life in prison. Joe Helen's trial was next. It commenced on December 2nd that same year. Geraldine also took the stand as a state witness, and again, when asked about Laura's murder, she invoked her privilege against self-incrimination. She was again granted immunity. Geraldine testified that she was the driver of the Ford LTD that evening of April 10th, 1983. She and her co-defendants downed a bottle of brandy when they decided to flag down a trick and rob him. That's when Laura walked by and eventually joined the women in the Ford. Now, instead of robbing a trick, Laura became the victim. All 5 women drove around North Omaha. They ended up in an alley when Joe Helen told Laura to give up her money and forced her to take her clothes off. Geraldine testified that it was Carolyn and Joe Helen who searched Laura's clothing and found $25. Disappointed with the amount of money they found, Carolyn handed over a razor to Joe Helen, who began to cut Laura's hair and ripped a gold pendant necklace from her neck. Intending to find a trick for Laura to make some money, the 5 drove around Omaha again. They wound up at Hanscom Park, where Laura was forced to have oral sex with Carolyn Joy. During this episode, Joe Helen popped Laura in the head with a razor, Geraldine testified. Sometime after midnight, Joe Helen suggested going to Hummel Park. At that park, Laura, Carolyn, and Joe Helen got out of the car. Although Geraldine could not recall who had actually taken the baseball bat from the car, she did testify that it was Joe Helen who beat Laura with the baseball bat, while Carolyn Joy struck her with the stick. The 4 women left Laura's body in a ditch and returned to Omaha, where they threw Laura's clothes into the trash. On December 13th, 1983, Joe Helen was found guilty of murder, and on January 4th, 1984, the same judge that sentenced Carolyn, Judge Keith Howard, handed down another life sentence for Laura's death. The 4th suspect, who was initially identified as Lori Johns, her name was Larae Smith. She was arrested in her home state of Minneapolis on January 9th, 1984, and later extradited back to Nebraska. Her trial started and concluded on May 10th, 1984. And again, Geraldine testified for the state. This time, she said it was Larae who invited Laura inside the car. LaRae was also found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. 2 weeks after LaRae's conviction, the murder charges against the driver, Geraldine Carr, were dropped after she agreed to plead guilty to aiding and abetting a felony and received time served. Carolyn, Joe Helen, and LaRae Smith all appealed their cases. LaRae's conviction was upheld. However, the Nebraska Supreme Court reversed both Carolyn and Joe Helen's convictions. Both women would stand trial for a second time, and each trial had the same outcome. Now, Carolyn sparked some controversy in 2003 when she was asking for an organ transplant. Her heroin addiction caused the disease that destroyed her liver. She said she knew some people would be opposed to her efforts at getting a new liver because of what she had done. The person I used to be, I'm no longer, she said. Carolyn did not qualify to be placed on the organ transplant list. In her interview, she said she was told to lose weight and better control her diabetes to become eligible. She spent her last days in the hospital of the Diagnostic and Evaluation Center in Lincoln. Her body pretty much shut down and liver failure played a role in her death. She died on January 6, 2005, which was 3 years before her next parole board hearing was scheduled. Out of all of these women, Laura was the youngest, and it's just quite sad that they took advantage of this young girl in an environment where you would think the older women would be of more support and possibly more protection than the pimps were in, that business, that lifestyle. That's just very sad. Regardless of what anybody does in their life, what they go through, you do not deserve, no one deserves to be beaten, robbed, sexually assaulted, and just left on the side of the road for dead. Rest in peace to Laura J. LaPointe. That's it for this episode, friends. Thank you all for watching. If you haven't done so already, please consider smashing that subscribe button so you don't miss what's to come. As always, I look forward to the engagement in the comments. Until next time.